Some houses don't keep ghosts. They keep the living. I didn't believe that sentence when I first heard it whispered in a diner at the edge of Appalachia. Now, after 6 months chasing paper trails, coaxing reluctant locals into interviews, and standing alone in the long shadow of a certain Victorian ruin, I'm not sure belief matters anymore. The Oak Hollow house doesn't care if you believe in it. It only cares if you step inside. Black Hollow Ridge isn't on most maps. To get there, you take a state road that twists through mountains until cell reception dies, past an abandoned coal tipple sagging into weeds, and follow a rutted lane into a valley where the trees lean so close overhead the daylight turns green. The first thing you see is the rusted welcome sign, bullet-pocked and leaning, proclaiming population 842 in faded paint. I came here because of a house at the very end of the valley road, a white-sided, green-shutter Victorian that from a distance looks like it belongs on a Christmas card. Locals call it the Swallowing House. They also refuse to go anywhere near it. In the past 50 years, 4 families have moved in, 4 families have vanished. No bodies, no suitcases gone, no bank withdrawals, phone calls, or goodbye notes. In every case, breakfast sat half-eaten on the table, and closets full of clothing remained untouched. The official reports call them unsolved missing persons cases. Locals just shake their heads and say, the walls took them. The first night I arrived, I checked into the only motel in town, a squat brick building beside the post office, and introduced myself to the manager, an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and a faded baseball cap. When I told him I was here to research the house, his eyes sharpened. "You're wasting your time," he said flatly. "That place doesn't give up its secrets." I told him I didn't expect the house to talk to me, just the people who still remembered the families. He snorted. "Remembering's a problem. Folks here, they don't like to think about it. Makes the walls pay attention to you." I laughed, the kind of polite laugh you give when you don't want to offend a local, but he didn't smile. The next morning, I started my rounds. The diner waitress pointed me to the town's unofficial historian, a widow named Mabel Cotter who'd lived here all her life. Mabel's living room was crowded with framed photographs, coal miners, school picnics, church socials. She poured me coffee, sat down across from me, and after a long silence said, "If you're set on digging, you need to know the story doesn't start with the disappearances. It starts with the man who built the place." That man was Elijah Whitaker, coal baron, land speculator, and by all account a man who believed nothing in nature couldn't be tamed if you had enough money and the will to break it. In 1898, he bought a stretch of forest from a mining company for next to nothing, cleared it, and built himself a mansion 3 stories high, with a wraparound porch and a widow's walk. The limestone for the foundation came from a quarry deep in the hills, stone flecked with pale green veins no one had seen before. Whitaker didn't live there long. In 1900, his housekeeper found him dead at his desk. No wound, no sign of illness, just sitting upright in his chair, eyes wide open, mouth slack like he'd seen something impossible. "That's when the rumors began," Mabel told me, lowering her voice though we were alone. "People said he'd built the house on the wrong ground, land that had its own rules, and the walls, well, they weren't just walls anymore." I pressed her for more, but she shook her head. "You need to see it for yourself." That afternoon, I drove down the road that locals avoid. It wound between stands of oak older than the town itself. The air cooler and stiller the closer I got. Then the trees parted, and there it was, pristine from a distance, the paint surprisingly bright, the roof line sharp against the sky. But as I parked at the rusted chain-link fence and stepped out, the illusion faltered. The paint was blistered in spots. The shutters hung crooked, and every window pane reflected the sky in a way that felt wrong. Not like glass, but like water. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring up at those shimmering reflections, until a movement caught my eye. Just for a second, I thought I saw a shadow pass behind one of the upstairs windows. But the house has been empty for over a decade. The air felt heavy, pressing against my ears, the way it does before a thunderstorm. That was when I remembered the motel manager's words about the walls paying attention. And for the first time, I wondered if I had already made a mistake by coming here. Most of what I know about Elijah Whitaker came from 2 sources, brittle newspaper clippings in the county archive, and a leather-bound ledger found decades later in the attic of his house. The ledger's pages are a strange mix, part building account, part diary. It's one thing to read about a man. It's another to hear his voice on paper. The clippings are predictable. Industrialist builds grand estate. Coal baron brings modernity to Black Hollow Ridge. They paint Whitaker as a self-made man who clawed his way from a miner's son to owning half the valley's mineral rights. But the ledger is different. In it, Whitaker writes about the peculiar resonance of the limestone he ordered from a remote quarry in Briar Gap. He describes how, when struck with a hammer, the stone gives off a sound like a bell ringing underwater. The quarry workers refuse to touch the pale green veined rock after the first week, claiming their tools disappeared if left against it overnight. Whitaker brought in laborers from out of state, men who didn't know the local stories. He paid them double to keep working. According to the ledger, the foundation stones arrived at the site in the autumn of 1898. The first thing Whitaker did was have them laid in a pattern that didn't match the architect's plans. The diagrams in his ledger show subtle curves and spirals where the plans call for straight lines, a kind of geometric weaving, as though the foundation were meant to catch something. It was about this time that his letters, preserved in the Historical Society's collection, begin to change in tone. Earlier, Whitaker wrote to his business partners about coal yields and profit margins. But by the winter of 1899, his correspondence becomes erratic. In one letter to a colleague in Philadelphia, he wrote, "The walls breathe on certain nights. I can feel them shifting under my hand, as though the stone remembers another shape. It is not unpleasant." I read that sentence 3 times. The archivist, a pale man named Henry Dawes, shrugged when I asked if it might be metaphorical. "Could be," he said, "but you have to remember, this is a man who built his fortune underground. He knew the difference between a stable wall and one that moves." By spring of 1900, Whitaker had moved into the house with only a skeleton staff. His wife had died years earlier, and he never remarried. His housekeeper, a woman named Ruth Palmer, would later tell a neighbor that she sometimes woke to find Whitaker standing barefoot in the upstairs hallway, his hand pressed to the wall, eyes closed, smiling faintly. On the morning of August 14th, Palmer found him dead in his study. The coroner, a man with no patience for superstition, wrote heart failure on the death certificate. But the ledger's final entry, dated the night before, reads, "The pattern is nearly complete. Tonight the wall will open fully, and I will step through." After his death, the house passed briefly to a distant cousin, who sold it within months. Over the next decades, it changed hands often. Some owners stayed a year, some less. Most complained of odd noises, cold drafts, and, in more than one case, soft spots in the walls that vanished before anyone else could see them. In 1927, a carpenter repairing a staircase reportedly put his hand clear through the plaster and into empty space before yanking it back. His foreman fired him for drinking on the job. I found that story in a letter written by the carpenter's grandson, who claimed his grandfather never drank again after that day. The deeper I dug, the more I began to feel the same tightening in my chest I felt standing in front of the house, a subtle but insistent pressure, as if the story itself didn't want to be told. One night, back in my motel room, I laid out all my notes and tried to see the pattern. For modern disappearances, a century's worth of whispers, and a builder obsessed with a type of stone no one had ever seen before or since. At the center of it all was a house, and its walls. I remembered Mabel Cotter's warning, "Makes the walls pay attention to you." I didn't believe in walls that could pay attention, but I did believe in patterns. And this one was starting to feel less like history and more like an ongoing process. If you listen to enough grief, you start to hear echoes, not words, patterns. I laid photographs and photocopies across the motel bedspread until floral print disappeared beneath case numbers and faces that never grew old. For families over 5 decades. For kitchens left mid-routine. For calendars forever stopped on ordinary days that turned out to be thresholds. I began with the Sullivans because every modern retelling does. In the sheriff's box, there was a Polaroid of their breakfast table. For place settings, the kind of plastic tumblers that sweat a ring onto oak. Half a grapefruit drying to leather. A radio on the counter, tuned to a station that no longer exists. In the margin of the evidence log, a rookie had scrawled, "Coffee tastes metallic," then scribbled it out. Beside the Polaroid, a bag scrap of paper, torn from a teenage girl's notebook, held a sentence that wouldn't leave me alone. Scratching again. Not mice. It learns the hallways. Family, too. The Carters. Different year, different decade, same refusal to make narrative sense. Their boy's teacher recorded a note. Student reports noise in walls. Parents dismiss. Night terrors increased. The Carters' kitchen held a pot roast turned to jerky on the stove and a handwritten grocery list stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cardinal. In the hallway, the wallpaper peeled in one long curl, as if someone had pressed a hand to it and pulled gently, slowly, until paper separated from plaster, like skin from bone. The professor, the third case, left more than dishes. He left instruments. The basement of the Whitaker house had grown into a rumor mill of its own. Stories about humming machines and paper tape spilling across concrete like a white tongue. The inventory photos confirm it. A makeshift seismograph, a rack of coils, diagrams stabbed through with pushpins where red string used to be. His final tape, tagged "transcription pending," was never transcribed. The spool sits in an evidence bag clouded by time, a thumbnail dented into the leader, as if someone hesitated, then didn't press play. The label on the reel has 3 words in a tidy academic hand. Boundary response, tonight. Family for the restorers. Cleaned well enough to give the house back its face. They painted the siding white, rehung the widow's walk railing. Photographs from a Christmas open house show ribbons on banisters that had once cut palms with splinters. Everyone in town says that winter felt like remission. Then a storm came down the valley and blew the power out, and by morning only the dog remained, alive, dehydrated, and staring slavishly at the corners, growling whenever anyone's shadow crossed a wall. The vet's note says refuses to enter rooms with south-facing walls. I circled that phrase twice, then underlined something stranger. Pupillary response delay when facing blank surfaces. As if the animal could see a thing that moved slow enough to be almost still. I made a table. Dates, weather, utilities, power bills, police response times, witness statements about sounds and lights. The columns failed to contain what the house did best, defy containment. But lines emerged. First line. Each disappearance followed reports of nocturnal pacing. Footsteps in upper halls. Then in the walls themselves, marches that mapped the house in loops. In 2 cases, neighbors described seeing shadows pass behind curtains when no one was home. Shadow isn't the right word. That's what you call a thing that blocks light. What they described sounded more like distortions, ripples where the fabric of the house thinned and shifted the light itself. Second line, the kitchen. In every case, normal life went to the edge of a moment and then stopped. There's a cruelty in that. It's one thing to die at the center of a drama. It's another to be interrupted by the ordinary. Eggs cooling on a plate, a radio song lingering in an empty room, so that the living must imagine the step that came next and never made contact with the floor. Third line, the walls. Not the squeaks and settling every old house performs to remind you of the past. These were described as soft places, as if the house had pockets and sometimes forgot to keep them closed. One contractor swore the plaster bowed under his palm like the surface of a pond. A different one wrote felt draft at seam where no seam exists. You don't forget sentences like that. They come back to you in hotel rooms at 2 a.m. when you realize you're falling asleep against a wall painted the same dull eggshell as the one where you pinned your evidence. Fourth line, stone. The limestone from Briar Gap with sea-green veining shows up in every account, sometimes as trivia, sometimes as omen. In a geology note I copied from the professor's files, there's this: trace inclusions exhibit anisotropic response to EM excitation. Sample softens under field. I don't pretend to understand the math, but the phrase, sample softens, lodged in my mouth like something I had to swallow carefully. When stone wants to be water, architecture becomes a suggestion. Fifth, and the one that made me set my pen down. Return. Not of a body, but of a voice. Years after Fort vanishing, a woman walked into town and told the editor she was the first family's daughter, grown older in a place without clocks. She said the house didn't kill them. It opened. It offered another version of itself. She warned of shimmers. She warned that the boundaries were thinning. Then she left, as if even her own story feared the attention of walls. I stared at the word shimmer until letters lost meaning. Then I went back through accounts looking for cheap reflections, mirages, heat. In 2 separate interviews, neighbors use the same phrase for the windows, like water. The restorer's photographs, professional, bright, the kind of images meant to erase history. Show a gloss on the interior paint that throws back light with a faint ripple if you look too long. Maybe that's a camera. Maybe that's my eyes. Maybe mirrors are training wheels for whatever the house has always been trying to do. I called Mabel to read at the table. She listened quietly, knitting needles clicking to the phone in little metallic heartbeats. "You're making that house think about itself," she said when I was done. "Houses don't think." Click, click. Then why do you keep saying it once? It opens. You put verbs on a place, and pretty soon the place believes you. After we hung up, I took a walk to unknot my head and found myself, without deciding, on the road toward Oak Hollow. Twilight in the valley doesn't closely resemble twilight elsewhere. It comes early and in layers. The trees that have been here longer than our maps press together until sky is an idea instead of a fact. When I reached the chain-link fence, the house was a silhouette cut from something too black to be wood. The shutters watched. The porch steps, 5 across, sagged like a mouth learning how to smile again after an injury. I put my fingers through the fence and let the metal pattern bite my skin. I had promised myself I wouldn't cross onto property without a plan. Plans make you feel like you can negotiate with fate. I stood there until the valley air cooled my sweat, until the first stars tried and failed to be seen through the canopy. That was when the kitchen light came on. It was not possible, not legally, not electrically. The utilities had long since been cut. Still, a rectangle of warm yellow appeared against the evening, soft as a lamp through paper. I told myself it could be a trespasser's flashlight, a reflection from a car on the distant road. The afterimage of my own fear. The shape held. Then, while I watched, the light slid, not flickered, not swung, slid, up the wall a few inches and stopped, as if the wall were a surface with room beneath it, and the light were a thing traveling there. I found myself whispering the rules I didn't yet believe. Don't touch the shimmer. Don't accept a doorway from an object that isn't a door. The light went out. Back at the motel, I compared dates again until numbers blurred. The pattern didn't explain the house. Patterns rarely explain anything. They just trap you long enough for the thing itself to move closer. Still, one new line insisted on being written. 6th line, invitation. Before each family vanished, someone recorded an anomaly. Soft wall, moving light, a sound like pacing. And someone else, out of curiosity or boredom or love of a good story, leaned closer. We always lean. It's the defining posture of our species. When I finally slept, I dreamed of the Whitaker ledger lying open on a table that wasn't mine. In the dream, the ink bled and pooled, and letters rearranged themselves into a sentence I had not read on paper, but felt I had always known. The house learns its guests by listening to how they speak about it. I woke with my mouth tasting faintly of metal, and my cheek lined with the imprint of motel wallpaper. Up next on my list were the Sullivan's daughter's diary and the professor's tapes. Paper and tape. Words and waves. The living and the almost living. If the house was learning, I would learn faster. Or, at least, I would fail with sharper questions. Because there's a difference between a legend and a pattern. Legends keep you entertained. Patterns keep you up at night, deciding whether to knock on a door that has never been a door and ask to be let in. The Sullivan file was the thickest in the sheriff's box. Photographs yellowing in their plastic sleeves. Interview transcripts typed on a machine that left a faint shadow of each letter above a line. The kind of case where everyone who touched it carried a bruise you couldn't see. James and Helen Sullivan bought the house in April of '79. He was an engineer for the coal company. She taught English at the high school. Their son Michael was a senior. Their daughter Laura just starting her freshman year. They had a dog, a shepherd mix named Kip, whose picture appears in the file more than once. in the yard, in the kitchen, on the front porch. The first days were textbook small-town arrival. Neighbors stopping by with pies, Sunday service at the Methodist church, a feature in the local paper about new life for a grand old home. Then, 3 weeks in, Helen told a neighbor she thought the wiring might be bad. Lights flicker, the woman recorded in her statement, and there's a knock in the walls that comes and goes. She thought it was pipes. Laura's diary begins 5 days before they vanished. The first entry I read was short, in looping teenage handwriting. Scratching in my room again. Not mice. Too slow, like it's listening to itself move. The next night she wrote about soft spots in the wallpaper. Sections that gave under a palm, like it hollow behind the paint, but not hollow enough for air. On April 28th, she noted a change in the sound. Not scratching now. It's walking, pacing, up and down the hallway inside the wall. Stopped outside my door. Kip growled but didn't bark. His fur stood up like in cartoons. 2 days later, they were gone. The responding officer, Ray Tanner, 24 years old at the time, noted the unlocked front door and the unnatural stillness inside. Kitchen table set for 4, eggs hardened to rubber, toast cooling in the rack, coffee pot half full cold. The radio on the counter played a station that had signed off for the night hours earlier. In the living room, a paperback lay open on the sofa with a pair of reading glasses on top, as though Helen had stepped out for a moment mid-sentence. Upstairs, the master bed was unmade. James's wallet and watch sat on the nightstand. In Laura's room, the diary lay open on the bed, entry unfinished, pen still uncapped. The sentence ends in a line that trails into a blot. The shimmer is back, but Tanner's report mentions nothing unusual in Michael's room beyond the half-packed sports bag. Track meet gear for the following day. The basement held James's workbench and half-built shelves. The garage contained the family's car. The only missing living thing was the dog. Kip was found 2 weeks later by a hiker 3 miles into the state forest, thin and skittish but alive. The vet noted no injuries but recorded abnormally elevated startle reflex. Animal resists being indoors. Kip was adopted by relatives out of state. He died within the year, never having set foot in a house again. The investigation spread like a net and came back empty. No bank withdrawals, no tickets, no sightings. The school kept Laura's locker sealed until autumn, then emptied it into a box of file. Among the contents, an undeveloped roll of film. The photos, processed later, show mostly mundane scenes. The dog in the yard, the kitchen counter, the front hallway. But one frame is different. I stare at that photograph in the motel room long after midnight, holding it close enough to smell the faint chemical tang of the emulsion. When I close my eyes, I could still see the ripple moving, as though the wall hadn't been photographed so much as paused mid-breath. In the days after the disappearance, locals started saying the Sullivans had gone into the walls. At first it was a cruel joke, then a whispered possibility. One of the volunteer searchers swore she saw a movement in an upstairs window while the house was being processed. Not a shadow, more like a shine, like heat off a road. No one entered to check. The case went cold before summer was over. The file ends with a short, typed summary in the sheriff's careful block letters. Status: missing persons. No foul play evident. No evidence of departure or abduction. Investigation suspended pending new information. I closed the folder and left it on the bed, but the story didn't leave me. I thought about that unfinished diary entry. The pen uncapped, the ink blotted, as though the act of writing about the shimmer had brought it closer. And I thought about Mabel's voice on the phone. Makes the walls pay attention to you. I wasn't ready to believe that yet. But I was beginning to think the Sullivans hadn't been the first to feel a wall lean in to listen. By the time the Carters bought the Whitaker place in the fall of 1985, the Sullivans' case had drifted into the limbo where unsolved mysteries go to fade. The county paper mentioned the history in a single paragraph at the back of the real estate section, and the realtor described the property as charming with quirks. The Carters, Tom, Denise, and their 8-year-old son Adam, saw only the square footage and the view from the upstairs windows. I pieced their story together from school records, Denise's sister's statement to police, and a box of photographs that someone had left behind in the evidence room. They moved in on a crisp October morning. Adam started at the elementary school the following week. His teacher, Mrs. Evers, remembered him as a bright, literal child, the kind who corrected the spelling on classroom labels and never laughed at knock-knock jokes. That was why, when he told her there were people in the walls of his bedroom, she didn't dismiss it as a tall tale. In her written statement, Mrs. Evers says he described hearing voices, soft and far away, like they were whispering through a cardboard tube. Sometimes the voices called his name. Sometimes they paced. Not walking like regular people, Adam told her. It's like they don't know where the floor is, so they go up and down. Denise's sister corroborated at least part of it. On a November visit, she heard a sound in the hallway that she swore was bare feet walking, then fading into the wall. She laughed it off to Adam at the time, but she told investigators later that the sound had been steady, deliberate, and accompanied by a faint vibration underfoot. 2 weeks before they disappeared, the Carters had an electrician inspect the place. The man noted unusual grounding patterns in the wiring and recommended replacing several panels. In his notes, which I found in a folded invoice, he wrote, "Client says lights flicker when pacing noise in walls is loudest. Advise maybe EM interference, but source unclear. The night before they vanished was cold and clear. Neighbors remembered seeing the kitchen light on past midnight. Unusual for the Carters. The next morning, Tom didn't show for work at the insurance office. Denise's sister called the house repeatedly. No answer. By evening, police were at the property. The responding officer's notes are a grim echo of the Sullivan file. Unlocked door, breakfast table set. Radio playing softly in an empty kitchen. The eggs this time were scrambled but untouched. The toast half buttered. The coffee pot still on. On the fridge was a grocery list in Denise's neat hand. Milk, bread, cereal, and curiously paint. No color listed, no room specified. Adam's room was tidy. His homework stacked neatly on the desk, a library book about astronomy open to a diagram of constellations. His pajamas were on the bed, folded. The closet door stood ajar. Inside, one section of the wall looked subtly different, smoother, as though the paint had been applied more recently than the rest. When a forensic tech ran his palm across it, the plaster gave slightly, like bread dough. Before he could press further, the surface firmed under his hand. His report labels it surface irregularity and moves on. The basement held no signs of disturbance. The family sedan was in the garage. The dog, a small terrier named Minnie, was missing. She was never found. One detail in the file stopped me cold: the answer machine tape. The Carters had one of those clunky beige machines with a tiny cassette inside. The police played it during their sweep. For messages, 2 from Denise's sister, 1 from Tom's boss, and 1 unknown. That one came in at 2:13 a.m., time-stamped just hours before the welfare check. The tape caught a faint hum, like an appliance running far away. Then a voice, low, distorted, almost blending with a hum. "Come see." Silence. Click. No one traced the call. When I visited Mrs. Evers at her retirement condo, she told me she still thinks about Adam. He never seemed afraid when he talked about the people in the walls. She said, fingers worrying the seam of her cardigan. More like he was curious. I told him once it was probably just the house settling. He said, "No, they're practicing." Practicing for what? I asked. She looked at me as if I'd missed the point. To get out. I left her apartment with the same sour weight in my stomach I'd felt after reading Laura Sullivan's last entry. A child certainty, unsoftened by adult excuses. I thought about that answer machine tape, the voice calling in the middle of the night, the smooth patch of wall in Adam's closet. And I thought about the pattern I'd been mapping. First the sounds, then the soft places, then the invitation. The Carters fit perfectly. The house had learned the shape of the game by then. The man who came next in believing ghosts, curses, or anything that couldn't be measured in units and plotted on a graph. Dr. Raymond Lee was a geophysicist from the State University, a quiet academic with a reputation for meticulous field work and no patience for folklore. In interviews with colleagues, he called the Whitaker place a perfect test bed for his theories about mineral composition and electromagnetic anomalies. The bank sold it to him for a fraction of market value. His wife, May, a high school chemistry teacher, moved in with him that summer. They had no children, just an elderly tabby cat named Salt. For the first month, Lee behaved like every other renovator with a mortgage. Repaired the roof, patched siding, replaced broken window panes. But his receipts tell a second story. Copper wire and unusual gauges, industrial-grade sensors, a custom-built seismograph, and an array of equipment better suited to a physics lab than a family home. May told her sister in a phone call, recorded on the sister's answer machine, that the basement looked like a space station. She said Raymond spent hours down there with his instruments, emerging at odd times to jot figures in a black notebook. She also mentioned something else. At night, the cat stares at the walls like she's waiting for them to do something. By early winter, Lee had begun recording audio logs. 2 were preserved on microcassettes in the sheriff's file. The rest disappeared with him. His voice is calm at first, clinical. October 14th. Subject property foundation composed of limestone, exhibiting pale green veining consistent with trace inclusions. Magnetic susceptibility readings fluctuate over 24-hour cycle. Source unknown. October 27th. Detected localized vibration in southeast wall. Amplitude insufficient to be audible to unaided ear. Repeat readings confirm periodicity. Exactly 90 seconds between peaks. Then, November 8th. Subjective observation. Heard pacing on upper landing while in basement. No other occupants in house at time. Vibration signature in wall adjacent to staircase increased by factor 3 during event. May report similar pacing in kitchen walls yesterday evening. The last tape is different. His voice is tight. The words clipped. February 2nd. Breakthrough. Application-controlled EM field to limestone sample caused visible deformation. Surface transition briefly to non-rigid state. Perceptible give under probe tip. Duration, 2.3 seconds. Energy requirement lower than expected. Hypothesis, large-scale permeability possible under sustained conditions. May reports shimmer observed in upstairs hallway concurrent with experiment. There's a pause. He exhales audibly. If the walls can be made permeable, they can be... Click. Tape ends. On February 5th, a delivery driver left a package at their front door. He told police he heard a low humming like a transformer from inside the house, but no one answered when he knocked. On February 6th, neither Lee nor May appeared for work. By the evening, officers were on scene. I read the scene report 3 times, but it doesn't get easier. The basement was warm, despite the February cold. Equipment still ran, dials glowing, paper tape spilling onto floor and undulating lines of recorded data. The seismograph needle twitched in a steady rhythm. On the workbench sat a chunk of the pale green veined limestone, cut flat on one side. That surface was wrong in the photos. It reflected light, but not like rock, more like oil on water, the surface subtly flexing even in still images. The text note says film artifact, but the same ripple appears on shots from 2 different cameras. Upstairs, the kitchen was mid-lunch. Bread sliced, lettuce washed, kettle whistled dry on the stove. May's reading glasses lay on the counter beside an open recipe book. In the hallway, an extension cord ran from the basement to a small device mounted against the wall at shoulder height. No one on the scene could identify it. The cord had been unplugged, but a faint warmth lingered in the housing. Salt the cat was gone. She never turned up. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no departure. Just absence, as total as the Sullivans and the Carters before them. The file includes 1 more page, an affidavit from the officer who shut down the equipment. He claims that when he reached the seismograph's power switch, the wall beside it bowed outward slightly, as if something inside leaned against it. He stepped back, thinking the foundation was giving way. The surface returned to normal in under a second. His captain dismissed it as stress and poor lighting in the basement. I didn't, because it matched something from Laura Sullivan's diary, and Adam Carter's warning, and now Lee's tapes. The house wasn't just pacing anymore, it was learning how to breathe. By the late 90s, the Whitaker house had become the kind of property realtors apologized for. Too big to be a tear-down, too cursed to be a family home. The bank had tried for years to unload it when Marcus and Elaine Duvall appeared, A couple in their 40s with no children, an appetite for renovation, and a conviction that history was worth preserving. Marcus taught architecture at a small college 2 counties over. Elaine ran a photography studio from home. They claimed to have never heard the local stories, though later interviews suggest that wasn't entirely true. "We knew it had a reputation," Marcus admitted to the Herald in a December Puff piece, "but we thought that was part of the charm." They paid cash. Within weeks, the siding was scraped and painted back to the original white, the widow's walk railing repaired, the porch sanded to a golden sheen. Elaine's photos, later recovered from her darkroom, show the house regaining a kind of dignity it hadn't worn in decades. They hosted their first Christmas open house in '99. Neighbors came reluctantly, but were surprised by how warm the place felt. No flickering lights, no odd drafts, no whispers between walls. People left thinking maybe the house's bad luck had finally burned itself out. Then January came, and with it, a winter storm that swallowed the valley in wind and snow. Power lines came down. Roads iced over. For 2 nights, the only light in Black Hollow Ridge came from candles and the occasional generator. On the second night, the neighbor across the road swore she saw a pale glow moving from room to room inside the Duvall's house. Not candlelight, not a flashlight beam. "Like moonlight under water," she told deputies later. And it didn't flicker, it slid. 3 days later, Elaine missed a photography appointment in town. Marcus didn't show for his Monday lecture. No one answered their phone. A welfare check found the front door locked, but the side door ajar. The scene inside was familiar. Kitchen, half-prepared meal, 2 mugs of coffee cooling beside the stove. Living room, Elaine's knitting laid neatly on the arm of a chair. Upstairs, bed unmade on one side, camera on the nightstand loaded with unexposed film. The basement, however, held something new. In one corner was a stack of paint cans, drop cloths, and brushes, the kind of supplies left mid-project. But the south wall bore a rectangular section about 4 feet wide where the paint was fresh, the surface subtly rippling under the beam of the deputy's flashlight. The ripple stopped the moment he stepped closer. His report notes that he felt a faint static charge in the air, enough to make the hair on his arms lift. The only living creature on the property was Hector, the Duvall's Bernese mountain dog, found cowering in a closet under the stairs. He was dehydrated and trembling, nails worn down from scratching at the door. The vet who treated him told me she'd never seen a dog behave that way without physical injury. "He wouldn't go near the walls of my exam room," she said. "Wouldn't even look at them, like he knew they could look back." Neighbors remembered hearing a low hum during the blackout, though no one thought much of it until after the disappearance. The power company found no issues with the lines to the property. The photographs Elaine had taken during the renovation were developed after the fact by her sister. Most are exactly what you'd expect. Stripped floorboards, new paint, sunlight, and clean rooms. But in 2 shots, both of the upstairs hallway, there's a faint vertical distortion along the far wall. The film technician marked them light leak, though the negatives show no physical damage. I sat in my motel room with those prints spread on the bed, tracing the distortion with my fingertip. It reminded me of Laura Sullivan's Ripple, of Adam Carter's People in the Walls, of the green-veined limestone slab on Dr. Lee's workbench. The Duvall's case never officially connected to the others. Too much time had passed, the sheriff said, but the files rhymed. And patterns, once you've seen them, don't stop repeating just because someone in a uniform says they should. The house had taken back its quiet. By 2005, the Whitaker house had settled into a kind of uneasy truce with the town. It stood there at the end of the lane, paint peeling again, porch boards warping under the weather. The fence was up, the no trespassing signs bleached and curling. No one in Black Hollow Ridge talked about selling it anymore. It was a relic, too dangerous to live in, too stubborn to die. Then, one spring morning, a moving truck appeared. The name on the deed was Jonathan Mercer, though most knew him by his pen name, Harlan Voss, author of a string of cult horror novels about thin places where worlds overlap. He was a tall, narrow man in his 50s, with a trim gray beard and eyes that looked like they were already halfway through a different conversation. Mercer didn't come to restore the house or to make it a home. From the beginning, he treated it like a specimen. He had the locks changed and a state-of-the-art security system installed. Motion sensors, cameras, floodlights on all sides. Heavy curtains went up over every window. Deliveries came weekly. Not groceries, but crates, coils of cable, and machines whose purpose the delivery drivers couldn't identify. Neighbors rarely saw him. When they did, it was usually after dark, a silhouette moving from room to room, the blue-white flicker of multiple screens casting strange shadows against the curtains. He never joined the church, never attended town events. Mail piled up at the post office because he refused to use a P.O. box. The grocery store in the next county overhandled his food deliveries. When carolers knocked one December, a pre-recorded message played through the intercom. "Thank you for visiting. Please respect my privacy." I spoke to a technician from a satellite internet company who'd done a one-time installation for him. She said Mercer had led her only into the front room and the basement, both stripped of furniture and lined with equipment. The basement had a map of the house tacked to one wall, covered in symbols she didn't recognize. The equipment list in her invoice was unusual. Custom EM field generator, thermal imaging arrays, oscilloscopes, 3 industrial-grade battery backups, and something labeled only as Phase Monitor MK3. When she asked him what he was looking for, he said, "A pattern in the noise." From the outside, it seemed the Whitaker house left him alone. Years passed without incident. No missing persons, no unexplained lights in the windows, no pacing noises overheard by neighbors. Some began to joke that maybe all the house needed was someone stranger than itself. Then came the night in early 2012 when a faint glow appeared in the upstairs hallway window, steady, bluish, not the warm yellow of a lamp. It stayed for hours, dimming and brightening at irregular intervals. No one saw Mercer outside for weeks after. In March, another delivery, a large crate requiring 2 men to move, marked fragile, optical components. That same night, a low hum carried across the valley. One neighbor likened it to standing next to a telephone pole transformer. It lasted until dawn. The town's rumor mill shifted into overdrive. Some said Mercer was building a machine to seal the walls for good. Others thought he was trying to open them wider. No one could prove anything, until the day in 2018 when the glow returned, brighter than before. It wasn't confined to one window this time. It seemed to seep through the curtains across multiple rooms, as if the house itself were lit from within by something neither fire nor electricity. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The next January, the moving truck returned. Crates and boxes came out, but no one saw Mercer. By the afternoon, the house was empty again. The realtor who listed it later told me the interior was immaculate. Every surface freshly painted, every floor polished. The basement was stripped bare except for a single device bolted to the south wall, a black, rectangular housing with a status light that blinked in a slow, steady rhythm. The electrician sent to disconnect the remaining equipment said it gave off a low-level static field that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The realtor had him remove it. It disappeared into storage and, like so many other artifacts from the house, was eventually misplaced. When I asked her what she thought of Mercer's years in the Whitaker house, she shrugged. Either he figured it out and left, or he decided it wasn't worth the risk. I don't think he'll be back. But in the back of the file, there's a photocopy of a handwritten note, and signed, postmarked from an address in New Mexico. The walls here are thicker, but they're learning. I'd been at the Whitaker house investigation for months when the sheriff's office called me. The deputy's voice was hesitant, as if unsure whether to be amused or afraid. She says, "She's Laura Sullivan," he told me. "You might want to come down here." It took me a moment to remember the name, the teenage daughter who'd vanished in 1979, whose diary had given me the first concrete glimpse into life inside the house before the disappearances. If she were alive, she'd be in her late 50s. When I arrived at the station, she was sitting in a corner chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her hair was white, cropped short, her skin pale in a way that suggested more than just age. But it was her eyes that held me, a pale gray, too steady, too unblinking. The first thing she said was, "I didn't think the door would open again." They'd found her walking along the county road before dawn, barefoot, wearing a faded nightgown patterned with small blue flowers. It was the same pattern described in the original missing persons report. The fabric was intact, the colors unfaded, as if no time had passed at all. She asked for water, then told her story without prompting. "We didn't die," she said. "The house took us sideways. It's still the house, but not. The walls are thicker there, like you're inside a version of the place that was never finished." I asked her what she meant. "The rooms connect wrong. You turn a corner and you're in a hallway you've never seen before, but it feels like you should have. And there's light but no sun, just this soft glow coming from the seams and walls. You can walk for days and never find an outside." According to Laura, she wasn't alone. Everyone the house had taken was still there. The Carters, the Duvalls, Dr. Lee and his wife. They recognized each other, but spoke less and less over time. "It's not that we forgot how," she said. "It's that the air makes you quiet, like the house is listening for certain words." She claimed the shimmers, the ripples I'd seen in photographs, were doorways, but only in one direction. You can go through into there, but you can't come back out the same way, not unless the house decides to open it from this side. When I asked why it had opened for her, she looked down at her hands. "It's getting harder for it to hold the boundaries. I think it's spreading." Spreading. She told me that recently. There had been new doors, faint, unstable shimmers that didn't lead deeper into the house, but into other places entirely. I saw one that opened into a grocery store aisle. I could see the people shopping. They didn't notice me. Another one led to a field I didn't recognize. And then there was one that opened to here, to the kitchen, like it used to be. I stepped through. She hadn't seen the others since. She didn't know if they could follow. When I pressed for more details, her answers grew shorter as if the effort cost her. She refused to stay in town, refused to enter any building with drywall. The sheriff's office arranged for her to stay in a small cabin outside the valley. I visited her there 2 days later. She seemed older already, hair duller, voice fainter. She told me she'd started hearing the pacing again, faintly, even in the cabin. "It's not just in that house anymore," she whispered. "There are other places like it, other walls." Before I left, she gave me something wrapped in a scrap of cloth, a small, flat stone with pale green veining. It was warm to the touch. "This was in my pocket when I came through," she said. "It's a piece of the boundary. Don't let it touch your walls." I asked if she thought she'd be safe where she was. She gave me the same unblinking stare she'd had in the station. "There's no safe. There's only before it finds you and after." 3 days later, she was gone. The cabin door was ajar, the bed unmade. No footprints in the fresh snow outside. On the table, the scrap of cloth. The stone was gone. Laura Sullivan's disappearance, her second disappearance, changed the nature of my work. Up until that moment, the Whitaker house had been an isolated anomaly, a haunted island in a sea of ordinary geography. Now, I had to consider the possibility that it was only the most visible breach in something much larger. I began cataloging any case that hinted at the same signs: pacing in walls, soft surfaces where there shouldn't be, lights moving inside solid matter, disappearances without exit points. Within a week, I had 27 incidents from across the country. By the end of the month, I'd mapped over 100. Most were dismissed as urban legends or dismissed in police files with a single line: no evidence of foul play, probable voluntary departure. But I recognized a pattern. It was a Whitaker signature, the invitation hidden inside the ordinary. Some were recent. A couple in Oregon vanished from their kitchen while making breakfast. Their coffee pot was still brewing when neighbors came to check. In Florida, a boy told his teacher he'd found a doorway in the laundry room wall before he stopped coming to school. His parents were gone too. In each case, the last reported sighting of the missing occurred inside a building made with either local limestone or imported stone of uncertain origin. The pale green veining kept appearing. I spoke with a structural engineer in Pennsylvania who'd been called to inspect a townhouse after residents complained of walls that hum. He described leaning his ear to the plaster and feeling a vibration like the frame of a guitar after you pluck a string. He found no mechanical cause. That same building was abandoned 6 months later, when all 4 residents disappeared. In an effort to understand, I reached out to a geologist who had analyzed Whitaker's original quarry site at Briar Gap. She told me the mine had long since collapsed, but that the few samples in storage displayed unusual crystal inclusions that responded to electrical fields. She refused to elaborate further and ended our call by saying, "If you have a piece of that stone, don't keep it in your home." Her warning echoed Laura's last words to me. The more I dug, the more I noticed time frames shrinking. In the early years, the Whitaker house would go a decade or more between incidents. By the time of the Duvalls, it was down to a handful of years. And now, these other cases, scattered across states, were occurring within months of each other. The boundaries weren't just failing in the house. They were failing everywhere the stone had been used. I began to see connections beyond geography. A photograph from a Montana disappearance showed a shimmer in a hallway wall that looked exactly like the one in Laura Sullivan's bedroom photo. A police video from Arizona captured a faint sliding glow along a garage wall just before the officer's body cam cut to static. But there was something else, a tonal shift in the phenomena. The Whitaker house had always waited. It observed, invited, and then acted. These newer cases felt impatient. The pacing was louder, the soft spots more frequent, the shimmers less subtle, as though the thing behind them no longer cared to hide its presence. One night, reviewing footage from an abandoned school in Kansas, I saw a shimmer widen into an opening, not a perfect rectangle, but an irregular tear in the wall. Through it, for less than 2 seconds, I could see another hallway stretch away into dim, shifting light. It was the same light Laura had described, a glow with no sun, bleeding from seams in the walls. I closed the file and turned off my screen, but the afterimage stayed. I couldn't escape the implication. If the Whitaker house had once been the only mouth, there were now hundreds, maybe thousands, opening across the country, and the thing inside them was hungry. The last entry in my notes for that night was just 2 words. It's coming. The next morning, I received an unmarked envelope under my motel door. Inside was a single photograph, an out-of-focus shot of my own motel room wall. Across the surface, a faint shimmer curved like a wave about to break. No note, no return address. The last time anyone tried to tame the Whitaker house, they came with permits, grants, and optimism thick enough to drown in. It was 2021, and the Black Hollow Ridge Historical Society had managed to secure state funding to restore and preserve a local architectural landmark. On paper, their proposal read like an act of mercy: stabilize the structure, repair the roof, replace dangerous wiring, and open the house as a museum. I had my doubts the moment I read the outline. The word preserve stuck in my throat. Preserving something doesn't always mean protecting people from it. Sometimes it means protecting it from people. The crew arrived in early spring. The leader was a contractor named Alvarez, who had worked on historic properties all over the state. He brought in carpenters, electricians, painters, and a small team from the university's architecture program to document the work. From the start, there were problems. Day 1, a carpenter setting up scaffolding swore he heard footsteps on the 2nd floor. Alvarez brushed it off as echo from his own crew. Day 3, one of the students photographing the upstairs hallway caught a faint shimmer in her frame. She deleted the shot, thinking it was a lens flare, until the shimmer moved between takes. Day 5, the new electrical wiring tripped every breaker when run through the south wall of the basement. The electrician rerouted it, but noted a persistent low-frequency hum in that section of foundation. I visited on day 8. The house smelled different, less like rot and dust, more like something warm had been moving through it recently. The air had that faint metallic tang I'd tasted in the motel when reviewing old case files. Alvarez was candid with me. "Look," he said, "I don't buy into ghost stories, but the structure is odd. Some of these walls don't match the blueprints. We're finding voids where there shouldn't be voids. Have you opened any of them?" I asked. "Not yet." He hesitated. "But we're going to." I told him not to. I told him, plainly, what happened to the Sullivans, the Carters, the Duvalls, and everyone else. He listened, but I could see the decision already made behind his eyes. 2 days later, the first void was breached. It was behind the north parlor, a section of wall that sounded hollow to a carpenter's knock. They cut a small square, intending to patch it after inspecting for mold. Behind the plaster was not insulation, nor brick, nor framing. It was nothing, not empty air, nothing. The space was dark in a way that felt wrong, as if the light from the work lamps refused to cross the threshold. One of the students reached in with a flashlight. The beam didn't reflect back. It just disappeared into the black. Then came the movement. The carpenter closest to the opening swore later that the darkness pressed outward, bulging slightly before retreating. He dropped his tools and refused to enter the house again. The crew sealed the hole with plywood, but by morning, the plywood had warped a subtle curve, as if the wall behind it was breathing. By the end of that week, 3 workers had quit. The remaining crew reported tools vanishing and reappearing in different rooms, unexplained drafts, and a growing sense that they were being watched. On day 15, they opened the second void. This one was in the basement, in the same south wall that had interfered with the wiring. When they pried away the old paneling, they found the pale green-veined limestone, warm to the touch despite the chill. A ripple passed across its surface while they were standing there. That was the moment the hum started, low and steady, vibrating through the floor. The electrician shut down the power, but the sound didn't stop. Alvarez ordered the site cleared until Monday. He locked the house and left. When the crew returned after the weekend, the lock on the side door was broken. Inside, the plywood over the north parlor hole lay on the floor. The basement paneling had been removed entirely, the green-veined stone fully exposed. Alvarez called the sheriff. The deputies did a quick search, but found no sign of forced entry beyond the broken lock. No footprints inside, no vandalism. They left. That night, the last security camera, mounted in the upstairs hallway, recorded 37 minutes of footage before cutting to static. The final frame showed a shimmer widening the far wall, the blue glow from inside spilling into the hallway. Something dark moved across the opening. When I reviewed the footage, I counted 6 distinct shadows passing through. None came back out. The next morning, the house was empty. Alvarez's crew, the students, all gone. Their vehicles were still parked outside. The Historical Society abandoned the project. The state rescinded the funding. The Whitaker house was boarded up again, but I knew it was only a matter of time. You can't board up the kind of door that isn't made of wood, especially when the door wants to be open. I had avoided going inside the Whitaker house alone. For years, I told myself I was a chronicler, not a participant. My job was to collect stories, not to become one. But after the Historical Society vanished, the boundaries between observer and subject blurred. The house was no longer waiting for visitors. It was looking for them, and it had found me. The photograph slid under my motel door with the shimmer on my wall had been the first nudge. The second came 3 nights later, when I woke to find my motel wallpaper subtly flexing with the rhythm of a slow breath. I moved out that morning. By the time I stood at Whitaker's front gate under a new moon, the air already carried that faint metallic taste, the one Laura Sullivan had mentioned, the one Dr. Lee's tapes caught in my memory. The boards over the windows were weathered enough to pry loose with minimal effort. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, warm stone and something else, faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a closed room. My flashlight beam slid over dust-furred banisters, warped floorboards, and the silent geography of a place that had already eaten too much history. The house was quiet, but not still. Every wall seemed to lean in slightly, as though listening. I started in the kitchen. The table was bare, but a layer of dust marked 4 faint circles where plates had once sat. I placed my recorder on the counter, speaking quietly, narrating my position. My own voice sounded muffled, as if the air absorbed more than it should. The upstairs hallway was where the shimmer had appeared on the Historical Society's final tape. The wallpaper there was newer than the rest, a pale cream with a repeating pattern of vines. As I moved my light along the wall, the vines seemed to shift, the leaves subtly reorienting toward me like the heads of flowers seeking the sun. I reached out. The surface was warm. The ripples started under my palm, spreading outward in a slow, deliberate wave. My flashlight flickered. Somewhere deep inside the wall, I heard pacing, not random, but purposeful, circling. I pulled my hand back. The ripple stopped. In the basement, the south wall waited. The green-veined limestone was fully exposed now. No attempt to cover it. My light caught a faint sheen running across its surface, like oil over water. I could see my reflection, but the face staring back was a fraction too slow in its movements, the eyes lingering on mine after I turned my head. I spoke to it, not out of bravery, but because silence felt worse. I asked what it wanted. The hum began, low and steady, vibrating up to the floorboards into my bones. The reflection leaned closer, though I hadn't moved. Its lips parted, but instead of words, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, climbing stairs that weren't in the basement. I stepped back, but the walls seemed expanded, curving outward like the surface of a balloon. Shapes moved behind it, some human-sized, some not. The glow Laura had described leaked into the room, pale and cold. Then came the invitation. The seam opened in the stone, no more than a foot wide, but widening as I watched. Beyond it lay a hallway, Whitaker's hallway, but stretched, warped, its angles wrong. The light there was steady, without source. I could see movement at the far end. Figures. They stopped when they noticed me. One raised a hand. It was Alvarez. His mouth moved soundlessly, but I understood the shape of the word. Come. I thought of Laura's warning. There's no safe. There's only before it finds you and after. The hum grew louder, the seam wider. My recorder on the counter upstairs clicked softly as it reached the end of the tape. I stepped forward. The air on the threshold was colder than stone, but with a pull to it, like an undertow. My reflection was gone. In its place was the hallway, infinite and patient. The pacing stopped. Somewhere far above, in the empty kitchen, the table was set again. 4 plates. 4 chairs. I put my hand on the edge of the seam. The surface yielded like skin. And then I stepped through.